There was music playing. The quiet melody danced through the air around her. The dulled beats seemed to drag from the each chord to its next, as through the instrument hadn't been played in years and was packed up, be played for that every moment. It sent a shiver down her spine to hear the haunting melody. The lavender unicorn treaded carefully towards the unable to see any light before her. She was compelled to keep moving forward, even though her destination was unclear. And it had seemed like she had been traveling for a long time by now. Her legs were sore, throbbing with everything she had gone through now. She couldn't even recall everything, just the constant pain inside of her. It was then that she saw a light ahead of her. It was dull, only bright enough to show her the details of the world around her. But it was a light. Stepping into it, she could finally make out the scenery that was around her. She was in Canterlot Castle. She would recognize her home far away from any other home anywhere. But the place had fared very well. The normal brightly colored tile floor was now entirely gray, rusted with the grime forming over the tiles. The walls, which were once hosted regular paintings and decorations, were now hosted the decay and grime that had covered the floors. The walls themselves were no longer made out of rock and gypsum, but now seemed like made of blood-stained steel. The once regal stained glass mirrors were now contained steel bars that held together by a chain-link fence. The castle was built like a cage. The unicorn looked behind her, expecting to see the front door of the Canterlot Castle. Instead, she just saw a normal dead-end hallway. Not even a hint that there had once been a door to the castle. However, she had gotten to the palace. She was trapped there now. She turned her attention back to the path before her. She knew the layout of the castle like the back of her hoof. Without wasting a moment longer, she then ran forward. The main hall was just straight ahead. It was there Princess Celestia most often greeted unexpected visitors, standing at the top of her stairwell before the stained glass images of her night and day. It didn't take long at all to reach the main hall, but when she reached it, she found herself stopped in her tracks. The hall was the same as everything else, fallen apart, rotted and stained with blood. The biggest change was the large, imposing stained glass feature that was now adorned to the wall, just above the stairs. It depicts Celestia as a large towering figure in the center. The single visible eye, colored a deep red. Houses and ponies were depicted below her, burning in with flames that engulfed everything. The sun and the moon sat above her head, eclipsing one another. To reach her sides were two symbols. One had a red magic circle depicting three inner circles and surrounded by runic writing. The other was a black magic circle, this time depicting a triangle in the center, filled with strange and twisting contorted lines. The runic lettering around the circle seems to be going around in the triangle, making it look similar to a clock. The unicorn's ears were then hit with the sound of rattling change. She craned around her head upwards towards the ceiling, spotting something like a chandelier shuddering and moving above her. The device hanging from the ceiling suddenly let out a loud snap of it as it fell. The unicorn had only a few seconds to move, jumping out of the way of the thing following straight towards her. She dove for the floor and covered her head, expecting to hear a loud crash from it hitting the floor. Instead, she heard the entire device rattle and shake, as if it came to a sudden stop in midair. The sound was followed by a pain-filled, horrifying screech that echoed through the main hall. The unicorn lifted her head and looked back at the horrific sound. What she had thought was a chandelier appeared to be a gigantic set of ornamental decorations, usually adorned for royalty. A giant crown was fused at the top. A tiara was hanging from the side. A regular armor and hanging pendants hung from the crown. Underneath it all were the decorations was a creature, looking as if it had been welded into a replica. Its skin was decaying, its back arched up at the crown. It had only had two back legs that looked painfully malformed. Its mouth hung loose, and let out a panicking, pitching wail, revealing a row of flat, broken teeth that aligned its mouth. The regular shifted and hung from a line from the ceiling. The creature flailed as its wailing body, trying to reach the lavender unicorn, wanting to sink its teeth down into her flesh. The lavender unicorn didn't want to wait around for the creature to get closer to attack. She turned and ran up the stairs, quickly making her escape. The unicorn ran straight for the hallways that she was familiar with. She wasn't so sure where it was she wanted to run to. She wanted to find her mentor, the one who taught her and practically acted as a second mother to her. She ran down the hallway, her hooves beating loudly against the bloody metal floor at her feet. She could feel the soft splatter of blood strike her hooves with each and every step. The hallway she ran down felt almost endless. Unable to anything too far ahead of her to see, it was hidden by darkness. She ran as the steel cage windows went by her. She could only see no light from out of those windows, or even if there was even a sky out there. Her hooves carried her farther. As the hallway continued to move, as seemed to change upon itself, the ground seemed to grow hotter, the walls seemed to turn brighter red, and the room seemed to begin to morph. The steel cage windows began to transform into cage bars, into stained glass depictions of ponies. Each stained glass seemed to depict a different scene. One depicted a pony being burnt to death on a stake. Another showed two ponies clashing, each with a different weapon and a set of armor. Another portrayed a pony being hanged from the cord held by the moon. Another depicted a mother throwing her child to hungry alligators below. Another showed a pony standing over the corpse of another, a bloody knife in its mouth. Another presented a dead angel being carried in the arms of a crestfallen pony. The images blurred itself by and filled the unicorn with a sense of dread upon seeing them. But not for a moment did she stop running through the hallway that seemed to have no end, running straight for the darkness ahead of her. Two piercing red eyes appeared in the darkness that she was running towards. She didn't even slow down for a moment, as her eyes seemed to stare. The darkness that she was running down towards began to spread throughout the hallway. It coiled and wrapped out around the structures and stained glass windows, spreading faster than she was running. The darkness crept past her and engulfed the entire hallway in darkness. The eyes faded into the shadows as the lavender unicorn ran. She ran into the infinite darkness, never knowing where she was being held at. Twilight stirred in her bed, feeling the end of her fitful sleep. She rubbed her head as she sat up on her bed, groggily yawning. Her nightmares seemed to have lingered for a moment, but in her mind still present, yet felt somehow fading. She hadn't had much of a restless sleep that night in a long time, and for a moment in her mind, but she didn't even put too much thought of it until now. She blinked several times, rubbing her eye with her hoof as she tried to get an eyeful of her room to determine the time. However, things simply remained dark. "It's too early to be waking up," she grumbled herself for waking up such a bad dream, before sinking back into the soft covers of her bed and closing her eyes to rest. She tossed around in her bed, getting comfortable once more. She would spend a few minutes in one position, before tossing into a new one, trying to return to slumber. This pattern continued until she finally grew frustrated with her own inability to go back to sleep. She sat up once more and rubbed her eyes, still trying to clear the sleep and drowsiness from them. She blinked to try and examine her room again. She found herself blind. She raised a hoof on her face and waved it, trying to determine how dark it was. The hoof touched her forehead, and yet it was still so dark that she could not see it. "What the?" Twilight whispered, confused, turning her head to the direction where she knew her window to be. On any normal night, where there would be a moon with natural lights of Ponyville shining through, allowing her to at least see the faint details of the room in the darkened night. However, the window just seemed to be as muted as the rest of her room. This darkness was surrounding her wasn't natural. "Okay, what's going on?" She grunted to herself and she concentrated, her horn flaring up with a simple light that spell illuminated from the room for her. The room appeared to be before her groggily eyes before she turned to look at the window, letting out a sharp gasp. From outside of the window, a piece of plywood had been hammering against it, bolting the sun or moon from piercing through. Oh, Evaldo, no good pranks, Twilight sighed, turning her head to the lanterns that hung in her room. With a swift flick of the magic, the lanterns burned brightly, filling the room with at least once more. She dimmed their horn as she heard the young dragon assistant groaning with sudden intrusion of light. Is it morning already? Spike groaned, sitting up and yawning while rubbing his eyes. Mostly likely, Spike, Twilight said, getting up from her bed. It seems that some pony put up plywood to block the morning sunlight. It was probably Rainbow Dash trying to get in one last prank before she leaves for her honeymoon. Twilight motioned with her hoof to the window. Oh, Spike said, scratching his head a little confused. Weird prank, then. He then stretched from his little cot, hopping out and heading downstairs. I guess I'll go ahead and get breakfast started for us then. That's very thoughtful of you, Spike. Twilight smiled as she watched her assistant headed off. What's the number of one assistant for anyway? Spike grinned as he made his way down the stairs. Twilight smiled happily as his energy, having just to be woken up, and walked towards over her bedroom mirror. She levitated the resting comb up and began to brush her hair. It certainly wasn't a disheveled mess, but it still needed a good combing. She was quickly going over the events of yesterday in her mind. Over how she worried about organizing the wedding, had been glad that everything came through, and over how a beautiful ceremony itself had been. Oh, Celestia had confided her with some strange secret. Oh, that's right. Twilight then turned to her head and looked at the barricade window. I wonder if she was successful at what she wanted to do. Twilight pondered her thoughts for a moment before simply smiling. Oh, of course she did. She's the princess. When she sets her mind into fixing a problem, she always succeeds. Relieved with her own revolution, she gently levitated the brush back down onto the nightstand. Huh? What's this? Twilight asked, confused and looking at something that had been on her nightstand before. A small, thin, brown box sat there. On top of it was a slime puzzle, consisting of 15 pieces, that formed a scrambling image, one that she could not picture by simply just looking at it. Twilight levitated the strange box so she could see it better. The box had a hinge on the side, and it seemed to open down the middle of it. Twilight then shook the box gently, hearing something rattle inside of it. She tried to pry open the box to see what it contained, only to find it locked soundly. She stared at the puzzle for a moment, and when a thought clicked in her head. Oh, I see. The picture must be using some mechanism. If I solve it, the box will open. She smiled as she moved the tiles on the box, each sliding motion giving a satisfied click as it worked. Twilight! Spike suddenly shouted, running back to the room, interrupting Twilight's puzzle solving. What is it, Spike? Twilight asked, confused. The sudden urgency of the baby dragon, putting the box back down on the desk. It's not just the bedroom window, it's the whole house. Spike pointed out the stairs with urgency. The whole house? Twilight said, dumbstruck by this. She quickly followed Spike out of her room and down onto the lower floors of the library. Sure enough, it looked like around every single window she spot was boarded up next with the same plywood, blocking any light from entering. Spike had already lit as many lanterns around the house as he could, illuminating the interior of the library for them. Okay, what the hey? Twilight demanded, walking up next to the door. Her horn lit up and grabbed a hold of the boards and pushed it open as she needed to get to the bottom of this elaborate prank. Twilight's face then ran straight for the door. She stepped back a few paces and shook her head, rubbing her snout. The door remained firmly locked before her. Her glare at the door and lit it up with magic once more, pushing it and pulling on it to force it open. The door refused to budge an inch, however, no matter how much force Twilight applied. Why is this door locked? Why can't I open it? Twilight growled with frustration. Okay, this prank has gone far enough. How am I supposed to see Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy off to their honeymoon if I can't leave my house? She groaned while walking up to the door with a hoof and trying to use the handle. It was then that I noticed something new was on the door that had never been before. A new lock had been installed into the center of the door. It seemed that the lock was holding a door in place. "Spike, give me the book that has the lock-picking spell in it," Twilight spoke calmly. Right away, Spike saluted to himself before he dashed across the library to grab hold of the ladder. He wheeled it over to Section 2 before climbing up to Shelf G. He quickly pulled a brown box from the shelf and waved at it. "Here it is, a guide to locks and mechanisms." Spike grinned happily as the book was suddenly engulfed into light. "Whoa!" Spike cried out, as Twilight's magic dragged him and the book over, causing him to smash onto the floor. "Oh, sorry, Spike," Twilight said, quickly helping him off and dusting him off. "I'm just a little frustrated. I don't want us to hinder us from our plans today." Yeah, I understand," Spike said softly. "While you figure this out, I'm gonna go ahead and make breakfast." The purple dragon quickly headed off for the kitchen to prepare themselves meals. All right, lock-picking. Twilight quickly flipped through the pages, looking for the right spell. Aha! She pointed at the aloud, occurring to the knowledge of sought. With a quick scan of the page, she memorized the spell and closed the book, her horn igniting with more magic. "Let's get this lock out of the way." She pointed her horn at the door, a stream of magic firing forth and straight into the lock. She heard the tumbles moving and grinding inside of the lock before she heard a loud click, telling her that the spell had worked. Alright, now let's go find out what's going on. The door gave out a jarring click as Twilight tried to open it, telling her that the lock was still firmly secured. "Hey!" Twilight glared at the book before igniting her magic and casting the spell once more. The lock whirled and grinned in place once more as the spell danced inside of the lock, before finishing with a loud click. Twilight pushed the door once more, the door resisting with just another click. "Arrgh!" Twilight growled in frustration, and to cast the spell once more as the spell worked on the lock. Twilight grabbed the handle with both hooves and frustratingly shook the door to try and pry it open. Even as the spell would have finished it with the usual click, it refused to open. Twilight sat down back on her haunches and rubbed her head in frustration. For some reason, the lock-picking spell was working, yet it wasn't. Maybe it's just an anti-magic enhancement with the lock, Spike then said, walking into the living room, him with 2 plates containing their breakfast, a daisy sandwich for Twilight and a small pile of common turquoise that she had been given as after the reception. Well, as if any unicorn enchanted it, it would have been rarity, but she isn't the type to prank ponies, especially not like this. Twilight grumbled, walking over to the table Spike had placed her breakfast onto. She took a bite, trying to figure it out in her head. "Maybe Celestia enchanted it?" Spike asked curiously, stuffing a gem into his mouth. "Don't be silly, Spike. The princess wouldn't go as far as to do something like this, not when I have something as important as seeing my friends and a date planned out." Twilight rolled her eyes. "Though perhaps we could use her to get us out of here," Twilight smiled. "Spike, quickly grab me a quill and a parchment." "Can do," Spike said, huffling at least a few more gems in his mouth before rushing off to returning shortly with the quill and paper. "All right. Dear Princess Celestia," Twilight began. Spike began quickly writing away. "I am writing to you because it appears that some prankster has boarded up my house and made it impossible for me to leave. The door has been sealed with a magic-resistant lock, and I can't seem to open it. Since I assume you're still in town, I was hoping you could stop by and help me out, so I could continue with my day. Your faithful student, Twilight Sparkle." "Done and done," Spike said, punctuating the letter with it finally, before rolling up the scroll. With a quick inhale, he held the scroll up, and exhaled brilliant emerald flame upon the message. The paper, alight from the green flame, quickly succumbed to the heat as it fell into a pile of ashes on the floor. "Spike, I told you not to send the letter, not burn it," Twilight sighed, with exasperated with her assistant's work. "But that's how I always send letters." Spike's baffled. He quickly pulled out a spare sheet of scroll paper and quickly wrote down Twilight's letter. He then rolled it up once more and held it up. "Okay, this is how I've sent every letter in the past," He spoke quickly, remembering his lessons on how to send things properly with his green fire. He inhaled it expertly before spouting out another emerald flame onto the paper. Once more, the message was burnt onto the ashes, joining the other pile of paper on the floor. Wait, so we can't send letters to the Princess either? Twilight asked, shocked at this revelation. I guess not, Spike said, just confused as Twilight. I'm starting to think that this is just some prank then, Twilight said, turning back to her the other door. This is too elaborate to be some joke. Who could have done this? I don't know. No pony in Ponyville is capable of preventing me from sending Spike then stopped mid-sentence, as his eyes bulged and closed his mouth, his cheeks boggling as he had his hands over his stomach. Twilight quickly turned to look at her dragon for assistance, before he suddenly let out a loud belch. Smoke and fire spewing out of the circle of his head, forming a burst of magic onto a scroll. Huh? Maybe she got her letter anyway, Twilight said, confused, quickly levitating the scroll over to her and opened it. If it was a letter from Celestia, it was the weirdest letter Twilight had ever received from the princess. The scroll was marked with random designs and scribbled all over, done mostly in black, but with some sections in red. She concentrated hard with the scroll and thought that she could see something written underneath the scribbled madness. It seemed that the sections in red contained actual message that had been scribbled over by the sections in black. What does it say? Spike asked, unable to see the mess of the document. I'm not sure. I'm going to find out, though, Twilight said, pushing her sandwich aside before laying the scroll down on the flat table. She pushed the plate aside and bumped it into something, knocking it off the table. This caught Spike's attention and walked over to the table to pick it up. Twilight concentrated on her magic quickly, scanned for the scroll with it. Before pulling it back, ink straight off of the page, another blank scroll was levitated onto her side. She cleanly placed the black ink into the scroll, creating two separate documents. She glanced up upon the scroll that was now contained with the words written in red ink, and read carefully. For what has happened, there is no apology. Twisted be a revelation, under the disguise of relief. Howled for all, hurt and shocked. Their slight finds no light in remorse, no regret, no apology, no return. The letter was almost incomprehensible. If there has been someone intended for her to read, the message had been hidden underneath the scratch-up nonsense. But then at the top of it all, the letter had a strange capitalization, as if the writer had no concept of where the words need to be punctuated. Hey, Twilight, have we always had this? Spike asked, causing Twilight's attention to rise from the note. In Spike's hands were some kind of small box, what look like a mahogany. Let me see that, Twilight said. Spike handed it over to Twilight as she quickly inspected the box. The box had a seam near the top of the small hinges, indicating that it was meant to open. On the side that she could see a small hole that led into the device. When Twilight tried to open it, she found that it was locked, obviously needing it somewhere or something in the hole to open it. It was then that Twilight looked up at Spike, though the beginning the form of each other. Spike, there's no way this is a prank any longer. Twilight put the box down and stood up from her spot. I need you to quickly go search around this floor for the library for anything and everything that wasn't there before we went to sleep. I'm going to search upstairs for the same things. I understand, Spike said, quickly returning his plate to scarf down the rest of his gems before he was searching quickly. Twilight made her way back to the upper floor, swiftly returning to the bedroom. Once on the nightstand, she could see the strange puzzle device that had been inspecting earlier. She quickly gathered it with her magic and looked around the room carefully. There were usual strewn books, Spike's small, cluttered mess she called a bed, various decorations, and reminders of her stay in Ponyville for the last year. Not seeing anything out of the ordinary, she made her way to the bathroom. Lighting up the bathroom with its lantern, it seemed like at first glance, towels were where they should be. The bathtub was empty. The mirror above the sink reflected her image as always. However, on the sink, alongside with the usual sundries, the newer brown bottle, the label read health drink on it. Twilight levitated the drink as well and quickly headed back downstairs until she hadn't missed anything else obvious. She saw Spike was still searching quickly around the library, trying to not leave any space unturned. Twilight quickly walked over to the table, placed her 2 items, carefully re-examined it at what they had been already. It only took Spike another minute before he returned to the table, carrying another note. "This was the only thing I could find," Spike said, looking at the note over. "It says, when all is lost, when the darkness is its strongest, when all is a small cold you bleak, you'll find the light." "What do you think that even means?" Spike asked, placing it right next to the rest of the strange items. "I'm not sure, Spike. I don't even know what these things are doing here. But I plan to find out," Twilight said, quickly scanning through the various items on the table. There were 3 notes. 2 of each were part of one she had split in half in 2 boxes, with the one slime puzzle on top of the strange health bottle. "But I'm gonna figure this out." Twilight quickly grabbed the quill Spike had used to write his letters, brought it over to the first letter, and had read. Something about it was written was really bothering her, and she couldn't just leave it as it was. She reread the note once more before putting the quill at the bottom of the note. She quickly wrote down each capitalized letters in order as they appeared. "They are watching?" Twilight looked up and around her house. There was no one here except for her and Spike. How would it be possible for anyone to be watching them? "That was when the letter from the princess?" Spike asked, scratching his head. "This still doesn't seem like a letter from Celestia." "That worries me about all this," Twilight said. The concern in her voice was apparent. "Hopefully opening these boxes will yield some answer. And since I don't see any way to open this box yet," Twilight said, moving the mahogany box to the side. "I'll try and open this one first." She levitated the sliding puzzle straight into sight and began clicking away at the puzzle. "What is a picture of?" Spike asked curiously, watching Twilight work away. "I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure that out right now, so I can solve this thing easier." She concentrated on trying to get the separate pieces to match up so she could figure it out sooner. Spike watched carefully, adding in the input, much to Twilight's discontent. It took several minutes, but before she started seeing a pattern forming in the image. As she clicked the pieces together and started seeing the full image, she simply grew more confused. "It's some kind of circle pattern," Spike asked, confused. "It's not one I've ever seen," Twilight said, just confused. Still clicking on the pieces away, she could make out the general shape of the picture somehow. She could see where each piece was able to go, and was able to complete the puzzle much more effectively. It took her just a moment to complete the picture. The completed puzzle was a red symbol, consisting of 2 large circles with strange, cryptic, ruined writing, while inside were 2 circles where 3 smaller circles were surrounded by the strange writing. When Twilight completed the puzzle, the box let out a satisfying click, telling Twilight she had just solved the puzzle correctly. Happy with her work, she opened the box and its contents revealing nothing more than a music box key. Twilight carefully lifted it up, examining the piece. She then looked over the second box on the table, noticing the small hole inside was the same size as the end of the music box key. "Really?" Twilight groaned. "I opened up the box to a key to get the other." She then sighed before lifting up the second box, and now slipping the key onto the hole. She left it snugly inside the box opening. It seemed to have stick. She slowly turned the key, hearing the gears grind inside with the device with each turn. Spike watched her carefully, grabbing a hold of the table as Twilight yanked the key. With one final turn, the small box clicked. Twilight reached to open the box when the lid suddenly flipped open on its own accord. Something suddenly burst out of the box, rising into the air. Twilight nearly dropped the box in surprise and action, as whatever hit her ceiling exploded into a bright burst of light. Twilight and Spike even shielded their eyes from the blast waiting for them to dim. Once it did, they blinked and looked up into the air, seeing the small shower of sparkling lights falling onto the floor. "What's this all about?" Spike asked, unsettled by the strange display that had erupted from the box. Have you ever finished the preparations? A familiar, regal voice said from behind them. Twilight and Spike instantly snapped their heads around, seeing a translucent figure of Princess Celestia standing there. This is an important night, after all. Twilight opened her mouth to speak with the image of the princess, only for her to be interrupted by a second, familiar, regular voice. We have ensured the preparations for the festivals. Though no need to not worry, the subjects shall be safe with us. The dumbfounded unicorn and dragon just turned their heads around, seeing similar translucent images of the dark blue alicorn with dark magical mane. Princess Celestia walking towards Celestia. Now though you should go, and though it's not too late, though you should not keep any friends waiting. Very well. Thank you for everything, Luna. Celestia bowed her thanks before turning around and quickly heading out. "'Tis nothing, dear sister. We shall always be willing to help thee," Luna smiled. The following sparks of the light faded from the world, leaving the two in the state of awestruck dismay. They could not find who the will till they had just happened. What the hay was this all about? Twilight? Spike finally broke out the sentence, throwing his hands into the air. The images of princesses? I've never seen them like magic like that before. What is even going on, Twilight? Spike, Twilight spoke softly, felt uneasy. I don't know. I really wish I did know. I'm getting a very bad feeling about all this right now. I need to find some pony, preferably Princess Celestia. But if I could find my friends, they can help us out too. After all, we can do anything as long as we're together. Twilight smiled reassuringly before looking inside of the box she had just opened. Hey, what's this thing doing here? Twilight levitated the thin, strange pendant with a point-cut crystal with a decorative silver flame. Hey, this isn't the pendant used for searching books in the Canterlot archives. Spike asked, curious about the device. It is, Spike, but why is it doing in the box? Twilight looked at it curiously, twirling around with her magic. She had then concentrated and poured some magic into the device. It lighted up brightly. It seemed to be functioning all right, she commented before gently wrapping the pendant around her neck for safekeeping. I'll hold on to it until we can return it to Celestia. And with that, Twilight checked the inside of the box once more to see if there was anything else left inside. Hey, a key, Twilight said, surprised at her discovery. Then she pulled the thin skeleton key out of the box and examined it. Do you think it's the key to the front door? Spike asked, looking over at the locked door. Only one way to find out, Twilight said, turning to the door and walking over towards it. She guided the key along the door. She heard tumblers and click into place, and with a quick turn of the key, she heard the door let out another click, telling her it should be unlocked, though after having heard it several times, she admittedly had her doubts. She raised a hoof to the door and pressed it against it to see if her actions worked. The door swung noisily open, as if the hinges weren't been used in years and were rustled over, a fact that seemed to be strange to Twilight. However, once she opened the door, all thoughts of the creaky hinges left her mind. A thick sheet of fog just sat out just outside of her doorframe, shrouding all of Ponyville. Within the confines of its embrace, Twilight couldn't even see the households as across the street. The fog only allowed a few feet of visibility. Holy guacamole! I've never seen the weather like this in Ponyville before, Spike said, shocked, looking at the fog himself. He stepped outside of the door frame and waved his hand through it quickly, some of the fog moving into his actions, but quickly being replaced by more fog. Twilight continued to stare in disbelief at the sight before her. Rainbow Dash couldn't have let the fog out like this cover Ponyville. Never would any other weather forecasts in Ponyville even called it for the town to be shrouded in fog, where the ponies were trying to desperately clean it anyway. How is that even possible to have a freak fog covering it, only to suddenly appear overnight? This much fog would take a while to build up. Not to mention there would be warnings all over the place in town. Everything would be around unnatural. I wanted you to know that if you see anything strange, you'll be prepared. Celestia's words finally came back to Twilight, awakening her from her suppressed splash of cold water to her face. Twilight quickly turned around and ran back to the table. Twilight? Spike asked, turning to see the strange actions of his unicorn mentor. Twilight quickly levitated each remaining items on the table, accounting for the free notes and the health drink. She closed her eyes and concentrated, creating a pocket inside of her magic revolver, the 4 items disappearing from the world and finding a new home inside a pocket. She then quickly turned around, looking at Spike seriously. "Twilight, why do you look so serious?" Spike said, unnerved more than the serious looking Twilight had than anything else that had happened that morning. "Spike, I'm heading out to Ponyville. I need you to stay here and make sure nothing happens." Twilight stopped suddenly as her eyes widened, her mouth dropping a gaze as her pupils were dilating. Spike lay on the ground before her, his body dismembered and separated in pieces scattered around the floor. His hot blood was splattered everywhere, including on her coat. The scratched claw marks trailing blood along the wall where the tiny dragon tried to escape from its attacker. The blood burned against her coat, telling her it was all her fault. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat and choked her. "Twilight?" Spike called out, causing Twilight's head to snap back, her eyes looking at the dragon assistant standing by the doorway. She quickly scanned the room, trying to find any traces of the horrific scene she had just witnessed. "Twilight, you're scaring me. What is it you want me to do?" Twilight couldn't speak for a moment. She felt completely shaken by the vision she just suddenly seen, one which she couldn't understand. She only knew that what the vision told her. She lifted Spike in the library. Something horrible was going to happen to him. "Change of plans, Spike," Twilight said, swallowing the fear that had lodged herself in her throat. "You're coming with me. We're going to find Princess Celestia." "Oh, well, okay," Spike said, before quickly looking out the door, the fog then back to Twilight. "Hold on, let me go get something," Spike said, before he quickly held up running upstairs to one of the shelves. Twilight watched him with a bit of curiosity, before the dragon returned, carrying a large rolled-up paper. "We should bring this map of Ponyville, since we won't be able to see clearly in the fog." He grinned happily. Twilight blinked oddly enough at the dragon, before smiling at him. The dragon's sentiments seemed to affect her even more than every moment. "Good thing, Spike. This is why you're my #1 assistant." Twilight gave her praise to the dragon, who took it at his usual ego. Twilight didn't even have much time to speak, however, wrapping him gently with her magic, before lifting him up, placing him on her back. "Let's go figure out what's wrong with the town," Twilight said confidently, turning to the door. As long as Spike was with her, she knew that she could handle anything the strange fog was going to throw at her. The two of them wandered quickly into the strangely silent Ponyville.